This week, Timmy and I dive into abnormal human behavior with an expert on serial killers and sexual murder, Dr. Louis Schlesinger of the John Jay College of Criminal Justice.
We wanted to let you know that this episode contains mature topics, including sexual violence. Please be warned.
Bald,
Blind,
and buddies. Timmy, how the hell are you, pal?
I'm good. It's like 50 here in the upper Midwest. It's about as good as it gets for late February. It's nice.
Okay, excellent. And today is Friday, TGIF. It's about 1 o'clock. Should be, a nice weekend. Any big plans this coming weekend?
I don't think so. I think we're helping. Paul's writing an essay. I think we're going to spend a lot of time helping him with that. So,
Gotcha.
parenting.
Well, I am beyond honored, Timmy, to invite our next guest. And let me just read you the dossier and the description of he from Wikipedia and, of course, the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. We are welcoming Dr. Louis Schlesinger, PhD, as a prominent professor of psychology at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice and a leading expert on serial killers, sexual homicide, and criminal psychopathology. He is a board-certified forensic psychologist who has researched both serial murder, conducted crime scene analysis, and co-investigated with the FBI Behavioral Science Unit. All that to say, we are beyond honored to welcome Professor Schlesinger to our call.
Thanks for joining us, sir.
I'm glad to. Thank you.
So, Dr. Schlesinger, tell me what exactly is psychopathology. Tell me a little bit about your expertise in sexual homicide, criminal psychopathology, and serial killers.
Well, psychopathology, that's simple. That's just mental disorder. That's all that means. Now, let me just tell you a little about forensic psychology. Everyone knows what a psychologist is or a psychiatrist is, but a forensic psychiatrist or psychologist is applying their knowledge of behavioral science to addressing legal standards. And for the most part, most forensic psychologists, psychiatrists are addressing things like state of mind defenses, insanity, diminished capacity, competency to stand trial, Miranda rights, and all the rest. There's a subgroup that deal with more investigations, using their knowledge base in behavioral science to assist in investigations. But in order to do that, you first have to understand the behavior of various types of criminals, how they differ, and what that implies about the type of individual that's doing that. And that's basically what that is. I've been doing this now. I've been a forensic psychologist now for 50 years, believe it or not. I can't believe it. Now, when I started, I used to be the youngest person in the courtroom. Now I'm the oldest. I know most of the judges when they were prosecutors or defense attorneys and so on. What happened in my particular case is when I did my internship, I did it at the New Jersey Diagnostic Center in Menlo Park. That was in New Jersey. That was the state's forensic facility. Now,
Thomas Edison, right? Menlo Park?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
It was in Edison, right? Without a doubt. And but when I did it, there were no really forensic psychologists, psychiatrists and psychiatrists in general didn't want to go into forensic practice. The Cadillac for practice in those days, we're talking about the mid 1970s, was private psychoanalytic practice, where you're treating the worried well. And God forbid somebody sick comes in, you get rid of them, and so on. And that's what everybody wanted to do. I was going to do my internship in New Jersey, a place called the Neuropsychiatric Institute in Princeton. But the supervisor got into some sort of car accident. He wasn't able to take students, so I went to the diagnostic center, and there I met Eugene Revitch, who was a forensic psychiatrist, one of the first in the country, actually. And he was really a teacher of mine, really a mentor of mine over the years. We became colleagues and friends. We wrote 3 books in the 1980s, and we worked together on so many interesting cases. And that's how I basically got into this. Let me say one other thing about Dr. Revitch. In addition to being a psychiatrist, he's also a neurologist. So he had a very interesting perspective on this. But he wrote papers beginning in the 1950s on sexual murder, serial sexual murder, before it was on anybody's radar screen. And I recently published an edited book titled Psychiatric Aspects of Criminal Behavior. It's the collected papers of Eugene Revitch. His articles meant so much to me when I trained. I just about memorized them, and I didn't want them to get lost to the next generation. So the first part of the book is on sexual murder. And the reason I'm saying that is when the FBI began their investigations on serial murder and sexual murder and that sort of thing, they contacted Dr. Revitch back in the 1970s because they were looking in the literature of, who was doing this. And he was one of the first people, one of the only people writing this. And so anyway, and that's how I got involved in it. And my first time I appeared in court was 1976 on a serial sexual murder case, believe it or not. And so that's how I got involved in this whole thing. And then I developed a relationship with the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit, the folks down Quantico. And we did a major research project for the past 25 years on all aspects of not just sexual murder and serial murder, but criminal behavior and extraordinary crime in general.
Professor Schlesinger, after Top Gun came out in 1986, the number of enrollees into the weapons fighter school and people who were looking to go into the Navy skyrocketed. It's a direct consequence. Did Silence of the Lambs, was there anything in particular that sort of made this genre explode? Because everyone I talked to, and when I told them we were interviewing you, they were like, you have to send us the link to this episode. I love this stuff. And then when we were in college, Timmy and I, it was my sophomore year, 1995. His name escapes me, but I know he taught at Boston University. I believe his name is Gerald Levin, and he was an expert in serial killers. And the auditorium held, say, 1,500 people. Dr. Schlesinger, when I tell you there was 10,000 people, it was no exaggeration. And he said, the first question I always get asked is it okay that I'm fascinated by this stuff? And he said, usually we don't worry about that. We worry about the people that aren't. Is there something that motivated this sort of genre to take off, or is it just, the fascination with abnormal human psychology?
No, it definitely had a lot to do with Silence of the Lambs. I could tell you this. We've had so many students at John Jay back, in the 80s and particularly, actually Silence of the Lambs was the 90s. So I guess the 90s, the early 2000s, 99% were young women who wanted to be Jodie Foster and hunt serial killers based on, the interest in Silence of the Lambs and that sort of thing. It has really captured the fascination of the world, not just the country. And you really have to credit the FBI with respect to making serial killers part of our common knowledge base and our common lexicon. There's nobody, I don't think you'll be able to find anyone who doesn't know what a serial killer is. But if you went back to the 50s or 60s, that word isn't even there. Yes. But today, for example, you could turn on numerous, not only podcasts, but on the Investigation Discovery Channel, Oxygen Channel, Reels, and all the rest of them. Every single day, there's something on a case of serial murder, sexual murder, or some other type of extraordinary crime. And I'll tell you this also, the audience on those crime scene documentaries is about 85% female for a number of interesting reasons. And I've done I would say I've done about 200 crime documentaries, not just on serial killer, but on other types of extraordinary crime.
Why do you think that interest exists? Like, what is it connecting with in people?
Well, I could tell you with respect to why I get that question a lot. A little more specifically, Tim, it's why is it connected mostly with women?
Right.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of reasons I think. Number one is women, generally speaking now, are more psychologically oriented than men. They're curious about it. Also, in so many of these documentaries that are out there, the women are the victims. In serial killers, in serial sexual murder, and even in domestic homicides, it's almost women are the victims. And when they, interview these people, whether it's domestic homicide or some sort of serial killer, they look incredibly normal. In not all
That is the
cases.
scary part, Dr. Schlesinger.
That's the scary
Ted
part.
Bundy, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They're
exactly.
handsome, they're charming, they're above average educated, and they just, that's the thing that is the most unsettling for me. And I'm the father of two girls and I have a son, so.
Well, let me just say a little bit about,
Yeah.
a little bit about Ted Bundy. Now, I'm going to approach this from the perspective of empirical research. Let me back up for a second and talk about empirical research and how I want to approach this. Serial killer is certainly highly popularized. It's all over the media on a daily basis. But so are other mental disorders, bipolar disorder, PTSD, eating disorders. You hear this also all the time on the media every night. So here it is. The number of peer-reviewed scientific journal articles on bipolar, PTSD, eating disorders is between, in the past 20 years, is between 50,000 to 70,000 articles on those disorders. That's a extensive knowledge base in which we can draw some sorts of conclusions. Take serial killing, for example. Most people think this is very well understood because people are very often pontificating about it with such authority. In the past 20 years, with respect to serial sexual murder, there was 19 articles on non-sexual serial killers, but only 13 articles published in peer-reviewed scientific journals on serial sexual homicide. And that comes from Medline Complete, which is the National Library of Medicine database. 13 articles on serial sexual homicide, yet you think everyone knows everything about it. For example, you mentioned they're handsome, they have high IQs. That's not true, because we did a lot of research on this. Most have average IQs. Some are, like Ted Bundy's an outlier. Dennis Rader, BTK, graduated college, that's an outlier. Most did not. Most are like working class or even unemployed
Really?
type.
Yeah. So Timmy's out is what you're saying. Timmy and you are out.
What about like Ted Kaczynski? Would he be considered a serial killer?
Well, that's a little bit different because there's a motive with Ted Kaczynski. It's a little bit different. But let me just jump off on what you just said, Tim. Serial killer literally means killing one person after another. That's a generic term, but there's many different subtypes of serial killers that have very different dynamics, different motivational factors, different crime scene behaviors. So the type of serial killer we know most about is the serial sexual murder. You mentioned Ted Bundy, Jack the Ripper, Boston Strangler, BTK, and more recently, the Gilgo Beach guy in New York. But what about Richard Kuklinski, the Iceman? That was one of my cases back in the 1980s. I spent 2 full days with him. He's a contract killer. He killed in a series, but the motivation is not sexual. The motivation was for money. That's what motivated him. Then you have the healthcare serial killers. For example, there was Nurse Cullen in New Jersey and Pennsylvania who killed a lot of his patients. You had Dr. Shipman from the UK, who was a family doctor who killed his patients. You have Beverly Alitt from the UK, who was a nurse who killed her patients as well. In New Jersey, there's an old case from the 1970s. The guy's name was, the media called him Dr. X, but his real name was Mario Jaskalovich. And he killed not his patients, other doctors' patients by the use of curare to immobilize them. And
What is curare for those of us that are not medically trained, like the two of you?
It's like a nerve. It's a nerve toxin that paralyzes you.
That's it.
But you're still conscious. It's
Good God.
Yeah. And but why did Mario Jaskalovich do it? Well, the motivation there was he wanted to be the doctor that handled everything and kill these other doctors' patients so people would come to him. Again, there's very different motivational dynamics, from a sexual motivation to money. And then the healthcare serial killers, we know nothing about them from an empirical point of view. You have case studies and so on, which is certainly important. but not from an empirical point of view. And that's how we advance the discussion. It has to be research based rather than just somebody pontificating on why they did it or their theories. I'll say one thing about healthcare serial killers and why it's so difficult not only to catch them, but to understand it is because once the victim is dead, the crime scene is sterilized. The people in the folks in the hospital come and sterilize the room and take the deceased out, and so it's very difficult.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah,
Dr. Schlesinger, what is there a criterion? Because there's a very famous line from a former Supreme Court Justice, Potter Stewart, when they were analyzing what is and what is not considered pornographic. I don't know if you've heard this before, but
of course, I'll know it when I
know
see
when
it.
I know it
yeah.
when you see it, right? How do we determine whether or not someone is a serial killer? Meaning, if someone kills multiple victims, does that, by definition, and I would assume the answer is no, make them a serial killer? Because there are umpteen examples of that. What are the criterion that experts like yourself use to determine, yes, this is a serial murder case?
Okay, now that's a very good question as well. Well, literally, again, if a person kills multiple people, one person after another, generically, yes, it would meet the criteria of a serial killer. But there's many, many subtypes, and none of the subtypes have a generally agreed upon definition, and it keeps changing. Now, there was an old definition that the FBI used down in Quantico, 3 people with a cooling off period in between, that type of thing. Well, that really wasn't. And then we went down, now it's 2 people. We're just trying to understand the dynamics here. So I wouldn't lock ourselves into a clear definition, because really there is none. But when you do research and you discuss it, the way to do it is you have to operationalize it. So if you say, I'm studying serial killers, you have to explain to the person, what is it that you're studying? Now, let me say a couple things more about that. If you look at some of the research, and I mean some of the older research, meaning going back 10, 15 years, many of the samples they used were mixed samples. What do I mean by that? They would use in their sample a generic definition of serial killer, which would include serial sexual murder, but would also include, let's say, a contract killer. It would also include, if you go into any prison in the United States, you're going to find a number of people there who, during the course of their criminal career, have killed 3 or 4 people. And you lump that all in. The problem if you have a mixed sample is your results don't have any generalizability. It would be like, let's study mental illness. And in our sample, we use schizophrenia, depression, personality disorders, and substance abuse. They're all mental disorders as listed in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, but there's a world of difference between someone who's schizophrenic, someone who has a personality disorder, and someone who's depressed. So your results have no generalizability. It doesn't advance anything. So you have to keep your definitions clear in order to have a discussion that's meaningful, or research that's meaningful as well. There's many, many myths of serial killers. In fact, you mentioned a couple of them, that they're handsome and high intelligence. There's a lot of, or that they're all psychopaths. That's another myth with respect to serial killers.
When we think about comparing it to other mental illness, you gave the example of bipolar disorder and et cetera. It seems like with serial killers, your research is limited to observation and correlation, right? With other models, we build an animal model for depression, or a swim test, right, to see how depressed you are. And I'm curious, how does research advance with this?
Sure, I'll tell you. Well, what I did, and you see, studying serial killer, it's almost impossible unless you're affiliated with somebody like the FBI. Why? You can't collect enough cases. The FBI is the only law enforcement group that has a national reach. And so when we did our research, we had, for example, in one study, 45 offenders with 162 victims. Now, that's a pretty good sample, and you could only do that if you're involved with the FBI. Now, you made a good point. How's research advancing? It starts out by description. My research is basically descriptive. So, for example, I'll give you an example. We know from so many people get their knowledge base from Silence of the Lambs, but we know from Silence of the Lambs that serial killers leave a signature at each crime scene. For example, Hannibal Lecter told us that they put a butterfly in the mouth, or a larvae of a butterfly in the mouth of all the victims, and that would link them all. So we looked at that. And so we did a study that was published in the Journal of the American Academy of Psychiatry and Law back in 2010. We looked at ritual and signature in serial sexual murder. What does that mean? It's behavior at a crime scene above and beyond what is necessary to commit the murder. Why? Most people could understand murder. That's not hard for a lot of people to understand. Sexual murder is difficult for most people to wrap their arms around. Why is somebody doing that? And the answer is, for these individuals, killing the person is not psychosexually sufficient. They have to go beyond killing the person and leaving the victim in a sexually degrading way, nude, with her legs spread, with foreign object insertions, mutilation, and so on. And so anyway, we took a look at this, and what we found simply is that they don't leave a butterfly in everybody's mouth. It's very, very varied, depending upon many, many different factors. The theme may be the same, but the exact behavior, like Silence of the Lambs, is not the same. I'll tell you one thing, though, that we found that surprised all of us, which I think is really one of the most significant findings in any of this research, is this. If you look at a series of victims, let's say 5 women have been killed. 4 of the women, the bodies have been dumped, nude. But one victim was mutilated in such a way, there was foreign object insertion, or there was mutilation, there was disemboweling, her eyes were cut out, her breasts were cut off, something like that. Most homicide detectives with 30 years experience would say that the person who mutilated the victim in this way is gotta be another person, because the one who did the other 4 just dumped them. That's not true. We found in 70% of the cases, the series of cases, 70%, the offender experiments at a crime scene and does something with one victim that he had not done with any of the others in the series. And you would only know that if you did the research rather than go by your experience, which is very limited, because even a detective with 30, 40 years experience in their entire career may have only had 1 or 2 of these cases. So that's very interesting. So if you see a series where one looks very different, it's not. Don't exclude him as a different offender.
Dr. Schlesinger, you're making me even more nervous now, because it was always my understanding, and again, to your point, sir, that I think the vast majority of us get most of our sort of news about this from entertainment purposes, if you will. It's infotainment, for lack of a better term, and Silence of the Lambs being the key here. So you're telling me that high IQ, and is it true, for instance, that most serial killers hunt within their own ethnic groups? Whites, hunt whites, and so forth. Okay, all right.
Yes. Most crime in general is intraracial. Most crime in general, not just serial killers.
Oh, fascinating. Okay. Are there predictive analytics or things that sort of predict the propensity? And again, this becomes dangerous because you don't want to say everyone who does X is suddenly going to be a serial killer. But I've always heard that one of the first indicators of serial killers, and this was particularly, I believe, the case with Ed Gein, correct me if I'm wrong, but they torture animals, and they start with that. Is that true? Are there other predictive indicators that people are likely to illustrate this behavior?
Yes. In my book, Sexual Murder, Catathymic and Compulsive Homicides, the second edition was 2021, so it's fairly recent.
By the way, we're capitalists here. Tell us about the books. We'll tell all of our listeners, all 12, 13 of them,
The title
to buy your
is
stuff.
by me. The title is Sexual Murder, Catathymic, Catathymic, Catathymic and Compulsive Homicides. It was published, the second edition was 2021. In the last chapter are 10 ominous signs of the potential sex murderer. Now, you mentioned killing animals. I would refine it a little bit, and I would say not just killing animals, but killing cats, because cat is a female symbol. if you were asked to, general
Wow.
population, ask them to rate on a 1 to 7 scale, cat, more feminine versus masculine, most people would say more feminine. Dog, for example, maybe more masculine. And I have 10 ominous signs, beginning with some signs that have very little predictive significance, like abuse, childhood abuse, that type of thing. Going to the most significant is that, and that is engaging in ritualistic behavior prior to killing someone. Let me give you an example. I had a case that I saw years ago. A 14-year-old boy abducted two 14-year-old female classmates. He didn't kill them, but he left them and he put tissue paper in their mouth. 4 years later, when he was 18, he killed two 18-year-old women separately and left the bodies with tissue paper in their mouth. You saw then 4 years earlier this ritualistic behavior. He didn't have to do that, but in order for him to be psychosexually completely gratified, he had to do it. And where does that come from? It comes from their fantasies, from their fantasy life. Somebody doesn't wake up one day and say, I think I'm going to go out and kill 5 women. That sounds like a good idea. No, it begins 10, 15, 20 years earlier in the offender's mind, in his fantasy life. And then he subsequently acts it out. Now, the number of individuals that have deviant sexual fantasies of this type, for example, is way larger than the very small number who actually do act out.
How does someone cross that bridge, right? If a lot of people have those fantasies, there's the natural repulsion to, murder for most of us raised in a society. What causes them to cross over to the actual carrying it out?
No, that's a very good question too. I'll give you 2 triggers, but let me preface it by this. Not just sexual murders or serial sexual murders, but in the general population, most people, men and women, have deviant sexual fantasies that they do not share with their partner because they're afraid if I ask my partner to do this, she's going to say, I'm not doing that. You need to see a doctor. What's wrong with you? I'm not going to do that.
You're talking to two lifelong Catholics, or at least raised such. So you don't have to tell me.
That's okay. The fantasies are still there, believe me.
Yeah.
But anyway, but now you ask, what would trigger them to actually do it? Well, I can answer it this way. There's 2 general triggers for men who do this, and that is loss of a job and loss of a relationship. That seems to precede them actually going from fantasy to actually acting it out. Why
so like
is
a narcissistic injury, sort of.
Yes, but yes, correct. But I would say it a little more generally. It doesn't necessarily have to be a narcissistic personality, but for men, most men gain their self-esteem from their job, from their occupation. As opposed to women, you usually gain their self-worth and self-esteem from occupation and other factors as well. But it's very difficult for a male to deal with the loss of a job and the loss of a relationship. So, but I had a case where a guy started killing people, harbored these fantasies. What set him off? His girlfriend got pregnant, and that set him off. So again, what I always say to people as well, and it goes to a lot of the questions that we're going back and forth on, this is not physics. This is not A happens, B happens, then you've got C. Here's what serial killers look like. Here's what they don't look like. This is very complex psychopathology, complex mental disorder with complex psychodynamics. That means the forces within the individual. And, Dr. Tim knows, being a psychiatrist, that it's very difficult to understand completely things that we've been studying for years, like the dynamics of schizophrenia or depression or borderline personality. And so you have something as complicated as serial sexual murder, and that hasn't been studied that much. It's very difficult. It has to go slowly, and we advance our knowledge in the discussion by research, by empirical research. Not to get into the weeds, but to look at it, simply from a descriptive point of view. What do these people look like? So, for example, in our study, we had 45 offenders, which is, a pretty good sample size. They're all either average or below average IQ. There was nobody who was like Ted Bundy. That's an outlier.
Or they didn't get caught. The smart ones.
Yeah, yes, they absolutely. They may not have gotten caught, or they were just prosecuted or only linked to one murder, and so you don't really know what the dynamics are. Let me give you one example about IQs and what goes on in the media. Gary Ridgway, he was operative
In River Killer, yeah.
Yes, up in the Pacific
Washington and
Northwest,
Oregon,
right?
Yeah.
And he was operative for about 30 years, and they didn't make an arrest. And what did the media say about him? He's a master of disguise. He's an evil genius. He's toying with the police. He's so intelligent. Do you know what Gary Ridgway's IQ was? You have any idea?
No.
You want to take a guess?
I've never been an expert in serial killer IQs. You, Timmy, you're the psychiatrist. You
95.
probably have a better guess.
83.
Okay.
He painted signs on trucks. He was a truck painter, sign painter. Now, he was always on law enforcement's radar screen. In fact, they interviewed him a couple times. But no, he just said, I don't know. Now, he was killing sex workers. So it's very difficult when the victim is a sex worker. Why are they attacking sex workers commonly? The hardest thing for a serial killer is the abduction. How do you get a woman to go with you? It's not so simple. But with a sex worker, that problem is eliminated because that's part of her job description. And so, that's what happens. Plus, you don't know the real identity of the sex worker. He may be killed in Gilgo Beach, but she may be from California. So it becomes very, very difficult. It really, really does.
That leads to two questions for me, Dr. Schlesinger, if you'll indulge me. Firstly, as the proud father of two girls and a son, I always joke that the Equal Rights Amendment is not just for the good stuff. Are there female serial killers, and what differentiates them from men? That's my first question. And secondarily, has there been an instance, like the Gilgo Beach killer that's currently being held, that we are able to prove that he's a serial killer post facto? Meaning there's a series of unsolved murders and it's in a small rural community, or this was in Long Island. So, but my point being is it possible to go back and say, yes, based on the evidence we found in these murders, we can now link this person, hence they're a serial killer, meaning we're not looking for a serial killer, but we found one by accident.
Well, let me talk about the Gilgo Beach guy first. First of all, he has not been convicted of anything.
No, absolutely. I appreciate you saying that. Yep, you are innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah, exactly, without a doubt. And so now a number of people have said, well, they've got his DNA. Well, it's a slam dunk. Really? That means you haven't been involved in too many cases if you think anything's a slam dunk. Nothing is a slam dunk. Anyway, getting back to the Gilgo Beach guy. Okay, they have his DNA, but his defense could be, I don't know if this is what he's going to say is, of course you have my DNA. These are sex workers. I had sex with them. I didn't kill them. There's no doubt that my DNA should be there. Well, we got her underwear in his home because many serial killers take souvenirs from the crime scene. He could easily say, yeah, well, I paid her for that. I mean, it's one of my fetishes. I have a sexual deviancy and so on. I didn't kill anybody, but that's an explanation. These are complicated cases and they're very difficult cases. With respect to young women being afraid, and that type of thing, you should not be afraid. You have to be aware, but you should not be afraid. Why? This is extremely rare. Serial sexual murder is as rare as can be. It's estimated that, well, first of all, out of all crime, murder is the least common of all crime. Among murder in general, sexual murder is estimated to be about 1% of all murder, or just less than 1% as an estimate. Serial sexual murder is a fraction of that 1%. So it's extremely rare behavior. And so the general public, while they're fascinated by this, and it is extremely interesting, but you should not be afraid at all. But you have to be aware. You have to be aware. And, if young women, for example, are out meeting people and so on, use your instincts. That's why God gave you instincts. Use them. If something doesn't seem right or the guy seems a little weird, end it right there.
Don't say that, Dr. Schlesinger, because I was definitely weird.
Yeah,
So
I'll agree to that. Quite
Timmy
weird.
can attest to that, right, Tim?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm curious. In 50 years in the field, what are the big unanswered questions you wish we knew, or if we knew them, it would make the world a safer place, or it'd make it easier for us to track these people. What's out there that needs to be known?
Everything, Tim, everything. We know, again, from a research point of view, and that's how we advance our discussion. In the past 20 years, there's only been 13 studies on serial sexual murder. What do we know? Next to nothing. This is, I mean, I hear people on TV all the time pontificating serial killers do this and serial killers do that, and they're all psychopaths, which is also not true. So what do we need to know? Everything, everything. Take a look at something we know that's been studied for years, like schizophrenia or various forms of depression, which is the cornerstone of clinical psychiatry, right? We're constantly learning things about medications to treat this, different forms of psychotherapy. When I started my training, the Cadillac of treatment for any mental disorder was psychoanalysis or psychodynamic psychotherapy. Now, almost no psychiatrists finishing their residency training now are studying psychoanalysis. It's all medication management for the most part. Not so back in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s. So it changes. For disorders that we know a great deal about. Serial sexual murder, there's very few people interested in it. And even those individuals that would like to do research, it's very difficult because there's not that many cases. To do intervention sorts, in other words, to treat the person and to do psychological testing, for example, it's very hard to do that, very difficult.
And is there the capacity for rehabilitation? Like, is that a thing, or is this just a pathology that's, the person is just so incredibly dangerous? Like, do people recover?
Okay, in my opinion, there is no capacity for rehabilitation for these individuals. If you go out and kill people because you're sexually gratified by killing, how are you going to change that? How are you going to do that? If that's part of your, in other words, let me say more generically. If you're a sex offender, for example, or let's say a pedophile, you're sexually aroused to children. There's usually not something that happened, a watershed event that caused that. It's part of understanding human sexuality. More generally, human sexuality is extremely complicated. On one end of the continuum are heterosexuals. On the other end of a continuum are homosexuals attracted to adults of the same sex, heterosexuals attracted to adults of the opposite sex. Is that it for human sexuality? The answer is obviously not. There's many, many shades of gray in between. And there's also deviant sexual arousal patterns, paraphilias, such as pedophilia, exhibitionism, voyeurism. These are all sorts of sexual, illegal for the most part, paraphilias and sexual deviancy. If you speak to somebody, for example, if you speak to someone who's gay and say, is there anything that happened that made you that way? Most gay people say, no, that's just the way I've always felt. That's just the way I am. If you're heterosexual, is there any watershed event that made you heterosexual? Most people will say, no, that's just the way I've always felt. And so how do you change a hardwired situation like that? I don't know how you do that. And even if you talk to people involved in the sex offender rehabilitation world, most of them won't say they can change their what arouses them sexually. Most won't say that. What they'll say is, well, we can help these people. We can list their triggers. If A happens, B happens, C happens, they act out. If they have some kind of psychotic process, we could help them with medication. Depression, we could help them. If they have substance abuse, we could help them with that. But changing their sexual arousal pattern, how would you do that? I've never seen that done. And so when you get to something like people killing people for sexual arousal, I don't know how you would ever change that. And what I would say also with respect to, I mean, this is my opinion now, any sexually motivated crime, and it's not just murder, burglary can be sexually motivated.
Really?
Oh yeah, sexually motivated burglaries. We did a study on that. It was published also in the Journal of the American Academy of Psychiatry and Law back in 1999. Sexual murder and sexual burglary. Yes, but if there's a sexual component to some form of criminal behavior, I don't trust any of that because how are you going to change it? It's part of their human psychology. What is it that you're going to do to provide insight? Well, most of these people have a great deal of insight into why they do this. It arouses them. So to answer your question more directly, I don't think we're nowhere near talking about rehabilitation for any of these extremely dangerous people.
Okay. Yeah. No. It's just a question that occurred to me. I agree with you. I was curious.
Yeah. Let me say one other thing, Tim. This goes mostly to Dr. Tim. The psychiatrists have the most difficulty in understanding these cases. Why? Because they say, if this guy's going around killing people and leaving them with things shoved in them, they have to be psychotic. They have to, this is a,
Right.
It's not true.
No, no.
They're not psychotic at all. But, that's psychiatry, basically. What they're doing is they're practicing general psychiatry in a forensic setting, and it doesn't work.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I've worked pretty extensively in folks with substance abuse. And what I tend to see is when somebody is so strongly motivated as they are in the grips of an addiction, their behavior just becomes rationalization of what they want.
Oh, yeah.
And so people just look that way. Although, when you help them with their recovery, they wind up at, being normal human beings. And so I always wonder, because these motivating factors are just so strong for human beings, and sexual drives are, that's why there's human beings. So I totally understand that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Is there a primal or evolutionary basis to why this develops, do you think? The Economist is always stuck on this, which is, why do certain animals behave the way they do? And human beings are, in essence, animals, and we don't have to get too much into this, obviously. But the question I had is to your understanding or your opinion, gentlemen, from your expertise, is there an evolutionary basis to why people have these motivations? And secondarily, going back to my earlier question, Doctor, is there tangible differences between female serial killers? Because they're few and far between, but Aileen, I forget her last name, was probably the most famous. Yeah. Is there tangible differences? So I'll let you answer those in whatever order you.
Okay. Well, let me do the female serial killer first. Aileen Wuornos killed a series of men. She was a sex worker who hated men for because they abused her whole life, and killed so many of her customers, her Johns. But she was evaluated quite extensively by people that I respect. They really spent a lot of time with her. There's no evidence of any sexual motivation there as well. Now, there are cases of women who have killed repetitively. Some have killed their children repetitively. Those are rare, but there are cases of that. Generally speaking, by and large, murder is a male thing. Not only sexual murder or serial murder, but domestic homicide, murder in general. It's basically a male thing. Do women kill? Of course, but generally speaking, that's true. With respect to evolution, I don't know the answer to that. I don't think anybody does, but I could say this. Serial murder is not a recent phenomenon. It is not an American phenomenon. It has been documented since pre-modern time. And if you think it's something a recent or an American thing, you'll be quickly disabused of this notion if you read a classic book by Richard von Krafft-Ebing titled Psychopathia Sexualis. He wrote it in 1886 in Germany, and that was I think the first description of sexual murder. He listed, I think it was about 15 different cases, mostly single victims, some serial sexual murder cases. Most of them, I think all of them actually, were European cases. And even if you go back to pre-modern time in Rome, for example, Caligula, however you pronounce it, he ruled with abject fear, and he was very sadistic. And he got gratification by killing people. He would cut people's tongues out for no reason at all. He would be at a banquet and rape one of the guests' wives and come back and discuss her sexual techniques in front of everybody else to humiliate the couple. And many, many examples. So from an evolutionary perspective, I know what you mean, deeper evolutionary. I don't know the answer to that, but it's been around, it's been described for many, many years. Serial sexual murder was described initially, reported initially from a scientific perspective by Kraft Ebing in 1886, not 1986 in Quantico, Virginia, but 1886 in Europe.
I guess just thinking about the female serial killers, if you think about the catathymic crisis model, right?
Explain that, you nerd. Come on, explain that.
Okay, well, I'll just do it, for the average listener. Basically, there's the killer develops an abnormal thinking pattern, which feeds into fantasies, planning a murder. The murder happens, they get some relief. And then in some cases, there's a restorative emotional experience and the loop doesn't continue. But in the serial killer, it does. I'm wondering if, I guess this is all theory, but is it possible in a female killer, they may go through the crisis, but not enter the loop because of their restorative emotional experience? Or I guess there's not much data on that.
Oh, well, there's no data.
Yeah.
But I'm certainly impressed that you had a very good description of catathymic homicide. That's very, very good. I couldn't improve upon that at all. Yes, could it happen? Of course. Anything is certainly possible. I have not had a case of a woman who committed a catathymic homicide that I could recall offhand. That catathymic homicides in general is a very useful concept. It's not well understood because there's a heavy psychodynamic aspect to it, whereas serial killers is easy to understand, one after another. Got it. Catathymic is more dynamics involved, an explosion, and returning to psychic homeostasis. It's a biological, right? It's hard for a lot of people to wrap their arms around.
Well, Dr. Schlesinger, I can't thank you enough. I will tell you that I feel less safe than I than I did at the beginning of this conversation. I'm just teasing, of course, and your expertise is beyond repute. So I appreciate you taking some time to talk to two idiots, one idiot. To that end, however, one of the things we do here at Blind and Buddies, because we don't see the world the same way, Timmy and I, is each week we offer our weekly whack job and hero of the week. Typically, as I am not a particularly big advocate of the current occupant of the White House, either Trump and or J.D. Vance or some of his enablers tend to be my whack jobs with a pretty regular basis. But we also offer heroes, people that have done extraordinary acts like giving blood, things of that nature. Is there anybody in particular, just from your experience, that you want to call out? We always find in law enforcement particularly that there are unsung heroes, and since you're indirectly involved in law enforcement, working with the FBI profiling and so forth, is there someone that perhaps you wanted to recognize or to chastise?
Alive or dead?
Either or.
It's all good.
It's all
good.
Okay. Well, I would think that Eugene Revitch, my former teacher and colleague, is really an unsung hero because so much of what he wrote about is so relevant today. When I edited the book, Psychiatric Aspects of Criminal Behavior, Collected Papers of Eugene Revitch, it was published by Charles Thomas, by the way, 2017. It was reviewed by Thomas Gutheil from Harvard, who's not really effusive in his reviews in general, but I thought he did a very good job here. And one of the things he said was, of what Dr. Revitch wrote about in 50s, 60s, and 70s is so relevant today. I'll give you one example. He in 1954, he wrote a paper called The Problem of Conjugal Paranoia. Today it's called in the DSM delusional disorder, jealous type. But if you read the description in the DSM, it's right out of Dr. Revitch's 1954 paper, unfortunately without attribution. And so, and he said things that are just so correct. The conjugal paranoia is basically when one partner in a marital relationship or a relationship develops a delusional belief that the person is unfaithful and this type of thing. It's not based in reality. It's an actual psychosis, not just pathological jealousy. It's delusional jealousy. He got no credit for that, nor did he get credit for any of the really seminal papers that he wrote on sexual murder and so on. So, I edited the book. They're all his papers. I didn't write any of them, to honor him, and so that his work isn't lost. But if you're looking for somebody to honor, that's the person that I would honor.
Well, it took a long time, Doctor, but on the penultimate day of February, we can honor him here. So I appreciate it.
It also highlights the notion of, how we're so caught in this presentism that our understanding now is, the best it's ever been, and we're more savvy and sophisticated. But people have been describing and understanding human behavior in different ways for quite some time. And the ability just to describe syndromes, over time, we're not where we were in some ways, and looking back can actually be so helpful. So I really appreciate that.
Oh, great. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time.
Dr. Schlesinger,
really
it was beyond wonderful. Thank you, and you're invited back anytime you'd like. And if there's anything I take from this, it's, oh my God, I've got to start reading more about this.
Buy my books.
I will, no question about it. That'll be my light summer reading. I'm going to be sitting there on the beach, and people are going to go, "What are you reading there?" Yeah. But thank you again, Doctor. Have a nice wonderful day. Weekend.
Yeah. Thank you. You too. Bye.
Well, Timmy, human fascination with abnormal behavior, I think, is prevalent. And it's particularly true with serial killers. And to the point that Dr. Schlesinger pointed out, I became fascinated by this, just like I would imagine a vast majority of Americans, as he pointed out, Silence of the Lambs. And having listened to him, he dispelled a lot of the myths that I brought in, that, the average serial killer is X or Y and those kinds of things. And just the idea that he basically at the end there said, we just don't know. And that to me is even more unsettling. But he did say, listen, just, use caution, use your instincts, but don't worry too much.
I mean, statistically, you're more likely to slip in the bathtub or get injured in an auto accident, orders of magnitude higher. Like, right. If you're going to worry about things, folks, there's other things to worry about. It is fascinating, though. This is fascinating.
And I would imagine you, even more so than most, with your background, your PhD, MD in psychiatry, would be fascinated by this.
Yeah. No, it was awesome. So.
Wow. Well, Timmy, have a wonderful weekend. And this is John Bolin signing off saying, hey, misbehave, drive fast, take chances.
And this is Tim saying, if everybody likes what you're doing, you're probably not doing anything worthwhile. Let's keep talking.